The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine chrome and glass of the human diplomatic complex. Hye-young's antennae quivered as she gazed up at the towering structure, her four-fingered hands clutching tightly to her small bag of belongings. The building seemed to touch the pink-tinged clouds, so different from the organic architecture of her hive city. Other meridians of her servant caste would have considered this assignment the highest honor. Serving in the human embassy was a mark of prestige. Yet Hye-young felt only uncertainty as she approached the security checkpoint. The human guard's eyes widened slightly at her appearance, but he maintained his professional demeanor as he scanned her credentials. "Welcome to the embassy, Miss Hye-young," he said, pronouncing her name carefully. "Ambassador Yoonji is expecting you." The use of Miss before her name startled her. Among her people, servants were addressed only by their given names, with titles reserved for the higher castes. She ducked her head in acknowledgement, mandibles clicking softly, a gesture of respect in Meridian culture. The elevator ride to the diplomatic quarters gave Hye-young time to recall her briefing. Humans were considered an anomaly among spacefaring races. They had achieved faster-than-light travel and established diplomatic relations across the galaxy, yet they maintained no proper servant caste. Even their leaders performed tasks that should be beneath their station. The elders had warned her that humans might display unsettling behaviors, but that she must maintain proper decorum regardless. The elevator doors opened to reveal a corridor decorated with artwork from both human and Meridian cultures. Hye-young noticed how the pieces were displayed with equal prominence, another peculiarity. In Meridian galleries, alien art was always placed lower than their own. She found the ambassador's quarters easily enough. The door bore both human writing and Meridian pheromone markers. Before she could press the announcement panel, the door slid open. Ambassador Yoonji stood in the doorway, and Hye-young's first thought was that the briefings hadn't prepared her for the reality of humans. The ambassador wore what Hye-young recognized as traditional Korean formal wear, but it was the warmth in her expression that caught the Meridian off guard. Among her people, such open displays of emotion between castes were considered inappropriate. "You must be Hye-young," the ambassador said, stepping aside to let her enter. "Please come in. I hope you'll be comfortable here." The living quarters were spacious and well-lit, with large windows offering a view of the city below. Hye-young noticed several things at once. The kitchen was fully stocked but showed signs of recent use. There were books and data pads scattered on various surfaces, and most surprisingly, there was only one dining area instead of separate spaces for servant and master. "Your quarters are through here," Ambassador Yoonji said, leading the way to a door. "I hope you'll find everything you need. If not, please let me know." Hye-young's inner eyelids flickered rapidly as she took in the room. It was nearly as large as the ambassador's own sleeping chamber, with a bed modified for Meridian physiology, a personal entertainment system, and even a private bathroom. This is for me?" she asked, her translator struggling to convey her confusion. "Of course," Yoonji replied. "You'll be living here for the next year at least. You should be comfortable." Hye-young's antennae drew close to her head, a sign of distress in her species. This wasn't right. Servants were supposed to sleep in small chambers near the kitchen, ready to attend to their masters at any hour. These quarters were fit for a member of the administrative caste at least. "I can sleep in the service area," she offered quickly. "This room is too grand for one of my station." The ambassador's expression changed subtly. "Hye-young, while you're here, you'll find that humans do things differently. Your contract specifies proper living quarters, regular rest periods, and fair compensation. This isn't grand. It's simply decent." The mention of a contract surprised Hye-young further. In Meridian society, servants were assigned, not contracted. But before she could process this, Ambassador Yoonji was speaking again. "I know this must all seem very strange to you. Take some time to settle in. When you're ready, we can discuss your duties and schedule over tea." "Tea? With the ambassador?" Hye-young's head spun with the impropriety of it all. Yet she found herself nodding, her curiosity beginning to overcome her anxiety. As the ambassador left her to unpack, Young looked around the room again. The view from her window showed the sprawling city, where humans and aliens of various species moved about their day. In the distance, she could see the spires of the Meridian Embassy, its organic architecture a stark contrast to the human buildings around it. She placed her few belongings in the storage unit, each movement careful and precise as she tried to make sense of her situation. The elders had said humans were primitive for lacking a proper caste system, but everything she'd seen so far suggested something far more complex. A soft chime sounded, the ambassador's way of calling for her. Young straightened her service robes and checked her antennae in the mirror. Whatever strange customs these humans had, she would adapt and serve with honor. It was what she had been bred and trained for. Yet as she walked to the main living area, she couldn't shake the feeling that her world was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The humans had already surprised her more in one morning than she'd experienced in her entire life in the Hive City. The ambassador was waiting in the living area, where she had set out a traditional Korean tea service alongside Meridian nutrient spheres. She gestured to a chair, not a servant's cushion, and smiled that disconcertingly warm smile again. "Shall we begin?" Yoonji asked, and Young realized this was more than just the start of her service. It was the beginning of something entirely new. 2 weeks had passed since Young began her service at the human embassy, and each day brought new confusion. She stood in the kitchen, mandibles twitching with distress, as she watched Ambassador Yoonji prepare her own breakfast. Again. "Ambassador, please." Young's translator conveyed her desperate tone. "This is my duty. You should not be doing such tasks." Yoonji looked up from the sizzling pan where she was cooking something called eggs. "I enjoy cooking sometimes, Young. Besides, you were busy organizing the diplomatic files I gave you." "I could have done both," Young insisted, her antennae drooping. In her mind, she was failing at her duties. Every time the ambassador performed a task that should belong to a servant, it felt like a personal failure. The past 14 days had been filled with such moments. Yoonji would help clear the table after meals, insist on making her own bed some mornings, and even picked up a fallen datapad instead of waiting for Young to do it. Most disturbing of all, she kept trying to engage Young in conversation about topics far above a servant's station. "Tell me about your family," Yoonji said now, placing her eggs on a plate. "Did you grow up in the central Hive City?" Young's inner eyelids flickered rapidly. "My batch sisters serve in various households. We were bred for domestic service in the southern breeding chambers." She gave the proper, formal response, yet somehow felt it wasn't what the ambassador wanted to hear. "Bred for service." Yoonji's tone changed slightly. "What about what you wanted to do?" The question made no sense to Young. "Want? I am a domestic servant. It is what I am. What I am meant to be." But even as she spoke the words, they felt strange in her mouth, like food that had fermented too long. Later that afternoon, Young faced another cultural puzzle. She was reviewing her schedule when she noticed a blank period marked free time. "Ambassador," she called through the intercom. "There appears to be an error in the schedule. There is an unassigned period. That's your personal time, Young. 2 hours each day, as per your contract. You can use it however you like." Personal time. Young's antennae curled in confusion. "But what should I do during this time?" "Whatever you want. Read, watch videos, rest, explore the embassy grounds. It's up to you." The concept was so alien that Young spent her first free time standing in her room, paralyzed with uncertainty. The next day, she used it to clean the already spotless kitchen. It took several days before she dared to touch the entertainment system in her room, and when she did, she felt guilty about enjoying the human music she discovered. The greatest shock came during the first diplomatic dinner Young helped organize. She had spent hours ensuring everything was perfect, from the temperature of the drinks to the arrangement of the cutlery. As the guests began to arrive, she took her place against the wall, ready to serve. "Hey Young," Yoonji called. "Your place setting is here, between Minister Park and Counselor Lee." Hey Young's translator actually glitched, emitting a burst of static. "Place, setting. Of course. You helped arrange this dinner. You should join us." The other human guests seemed to find nothing unusual about a servant sitting at the main table. The visiting Meridian dignitary, however, clicked his mandibles in shock. Hey Young could sense his disapproval through his pheromones. She sat stiffly, her posture perfect, terrified of making a mistake. But as the dinner progressed, she found herself drawn into the conversations. The humans asked her opinions on matters of trade and culture. They listened when she spoke. They laughed at her cautious attempts at humor. That night, lying in her too comfortable bed, Hey Young realized she had enjoyed herself. The thought was both thrilling and frightening. The next morning, Yoonji mentioned something called a weekend. 2 days of rest. Hey Young's translator couldn't quite capture her horror. But who will maintain the quarters? Prepare your meals. Handle the communications. Hey Young, you're entitled to rest days. It's part of your contract. But I don't need rest days. I was bred for continuous service. Yoonji set down her cup of morning tea. Just because you can work continuously doesn't mean you should. Everyone needs time to rest and recharge. The Meridian service caste does not. You're not in a Meridian household now, Yoonji interrupted gently. You're under human employment laws. That means proper rest, proper compensation, and proper treatment. Hey Young's antennae twisted in distress. Are you unsatisfied with my service? What? No, not at all. You're excellent at your job. But that's just it. It's a job, not your entire existence. The words echoed in Hey Young's mind for hours afterward. Not her entire existence. But what else could she be? What else was there? That evening, as she was tidying the living area, she found herself studying her reflection in the window. Her iridescent exoskeleton gleamed in the setting sun, and for the first time, she really looked at herself, not as a servant, but as someone. Someone who could sit at dinner tables and have opinions and enjoy music. The thought was so startling that she dropped the cleaning cloth she was holding. Before she could pick it up, Yoonji had already reached down and handed it to her. "Thank you," Hey Young said automatically, then froze. Servants didn't thank their masters, but Yoonji just smiled that warm smile of hers. "You're welcome," she replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And perhaps Hey Young was beginning to think, in this strange human world, it was. The diplomatic crisis began during breakfast. Hey Young was serving tea when Ambassador Yoonji received an urgent message. The ambassador's face grew serious as she read the screen. "The High Coordinator of the Meridian Central Hive is arriving in 2 hours, Yoonji announced, her voice tense. "This is completely unscheduled." Hey Young's antennae stiffened in shock. The High Coordinator was the highest-ranking official in Meridian society, equivalent to a planetary president. For him to arrive without proper protocol was unheard of. "He brings grievances," Yoonji continued reading. "Apparently, there have been incidents. Other Meridian servants in human households have been asking questions about their rights. Some have requested contracts like yours." Hey Young's inner eyelids flickered rapidly. "They blame you. And me. They blame human influence. The High Coordinator is demanding we revise all service agreements to match traditional Meridian standards." The implications hit Hey Young like a physical blow. No more salary. No more free time. No more choices. A return to the old ways, not just for her, but for all Meridian servants working with humans. "We have 2 hours to prepare," Yoonji said, standing. "We need to handle this perfectly." Hey Young's training kicked in. She began organizing immediately, her mind racing through protocols and procedures. The High Coordinator would expect traditional Meridian hospitality, but this was a human embassy. Every detail would matter. She adjusted the environmental controls to match the precise temperature and humidity of the central hive. She prepared traditional nutrient spheres, but also included human diplomatic refreshments, a subtle reminder of where they were. The arrangement of furniture was modified to reflect proper Meridian hierarchies while maintaining human diplomatic standards. As she worked, she could hear Yoon-ji in her office, consulting with Earth's diplomatic corps. The situation was delicate. Any misstep could damage relations between humans and Meridians. With 30 minutes to spare, Hae-young faced her biggest decision. According to Meridian protocol, she should wear traditional servant robes and take a position against the wall, speaking only when directly addressed. But she was no longer just a servant. She was an embassy employee with rights and responsibilities. "Ambassador," she called through the intercom, "I have a suggestion." When the High Coordinator arrived, he was accompanied by a delegation of 6 other high-caste Meridians. Their antennae twitched with barely concealed disdain as they entered the human embassy. The High Coordinator himself was impressive even by Meridian standards. His exoskeleton gleamed with the deep purple markings of the ruling caste, and his antennae bore the complex modifications that marked his rank. "Ambassador Yoon-ji," he said through his translator, "you know why I am here." "High Coordinator," Yoon-ji bowed respectfully. "Please, be seated. Hae-young will assist us with the discussions." A High Coordinator's antennae jerked in surprise as Hae-young stepped forward. She wore a professional human-style suit, modified for Meridian physiology, with a small embassy pin on the collar. She was neither a traditional servant nor fully human in her presentation. She was something new. "This is inappropriate." One of the delegation members clicked sharply. "A servant cannot participate in diplomatic discussions." "Hae-young is an embassy employee," Yoon-ji replied calmly. "And as she understands both our cultures, her insight will be valuable." The High Coordinator studied Hae-young carefully. She maintained perfect posture, her antennae positioned to show respect while still indicating her role as a participant rather than a servant. "You presume much, Ambassador," the High Coordinator said. "These changes you humans have introduced are disrupting our society. Servants questioning their place, demanding rights. This cannot continue." "If I may, High Coordinator," Hae-young spoke, her translator conveying perfect diplomatic tones. "The questions being asked reflect not disruption, but growth. Our people have always valued efficiency and harmony. Consider how much more efficient we could be if all members of our society were empowered to contribute their full potential." The High Coordinator's antennae twitched. "You speak above your station." "I speak from experience," Hae-young replied. "In the past 2 months, I have learned to prepare diplomatic documents, assist in negotiations, and help bridge our cultural differences. I am more valuable to both our peoples this way than I ever was as just a servant." The delegation buzzed with disapproval, but Hae-young continued. She pulled up statistics showing the productivity of Meridian workers under human contracts. She demonstrated how servant caste members, when given education and opportunities, often developed skills that benefited both societies. "Our traditions need not be abandoned," she explained, "but they can evolve. Is that not the way of all successful species?" For 3 tense hours, they discussed and debated. Hae-young moved smoothly between serving traditional refreshments and participating in the dialogue, demonstrating in action what she advocated in words, the ability to be both respectful of tradition and capable of growth. Finally, the High Coordinator raised a hand for silence. His antennae moved in a pattern Hae-young had never seen before, something between traditional authority and uncertainty. "You have given us much to consider," he said. "Perhaps there is room for careful adjustment of our protocols. A trial period, perhaps. Limited changes, closely monitored." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a beginning. As the delegation prepared to leave, the High Coordinator paused beside Hae-young. "You risk much," he said quietly. "Change is dangerous." "Stagnation is more dangerous, High Coordinator," she replied. "We reach for the stars." Should we not also reach for better ways to live among them? After they left, Young's professional composure finally cracked. Her antennae drooped with exhaustion, and she sank into a chair, something she would never have dared do 2 months ago. That was incredibly brave, Yoonji said, sitting beside her. And brilliant. You may have just changed the course of our diplomatic relations. I was terrified, Young admitted, but I kept thinking about all the others like me. They deserved the chance to discover who they could be. Yoonji smiled. You know, when you first arrived, you could barely look me in the eye. Now you're debating with the High Coordinator himself. Young's antennae curled in embarrassment, but also pride. I am not just a servant anymore, she said. I am becoming something else. No, Yoonji corrected gently. You're becoming yourself. The message arrived 3 days after the High Coordinator's visit. Young was organizing diplomatic files when her personal datapad chimed with an official notification from the human government. Her antennae trembled as she read the contents. She qualified for human citizenship. She sat down hard in her office chair, the datapad nearly slipping from her fingers. The words on the screen seemed to pulse with possibility and danger. Citizenship meant permanent rights, protection under human law, and most importantly, complete freedom to choose her own path. Young. Yoonji appeared in the doorway. Are you all right? Your pheromones. You're broadcasting distress. I received this. Young held out the datapad with shaking hands. It says I qualify for citizenship, but that's impossible. I'm Meridian. Service caste. Yoonji smiled as she read the notification. It's not impossible at all. You've been here for 6 months now. You've shown exceptional understanding of human culture and laws. You've contributed significantly to diplomatic relations. Why shouldn't you qualify? Before Young could respond, another message arrived. This one from the Meridian Embassy. Her antennae pulled tight against her head as she read it. They know, she whispered. The Meridian Council wants to see me immediately. The Meridian Embassy's architecture loomed over Young as she approached it later that day. The organic curves and bioluminescent surfaces that once felt like home now seemed oppressive. 2 guards, their exoskeletons bearing the marks of the warrior caste, escorted her to the council chamber. Inside, 5 high-cased Meridians sat in their traditional elevated positions. Their antennae moved in patterns of authority and disapproval. Among them, Young recognized Karthi, the cultural preservation officer who had opposed her contract with the human embassy from the beginning. You have been offered human citizenship. Karthi's translator conveyed his cold tone perfectly. This is unacceptable. Young stood straighter, consciously adjusting her antennae to show respect while maintaining dignity, a position she would never have dared adopt 6 months ago. With respect, why is it unacceptable? You were bred for service, another council member clicked sharply. Your genetics, your training, your very existence is dedicated to maintaining our society's harmony. To abandon this is to deny your nature. My nature? Young's translator caught the edge in her voice. I was bred with enhanced memory and pattern recognition to better serve. I've used those same abilities to learn 3 human languages and help negotiate trade agreements. How does that deny my nature? The council chamber filled with agitated pheromones. Karthi's antennae twisted in anger. You speak like a human now. Have you forgotten everything? The sacred traditions, the honor of service, your duty to your caste. Young's inner eyelids flickered as memories washed over her. Childhood in the breeding chambers, years of training, the constant reinforcement of her place in society. But newer memories came too. Sitting at diplomatic dinners, offering insights that changed policies, learning to enjoy music during her free time, being treated as a person rather than a function. I remember everything, she said quietly, but I've learned there can be more. That duty and freedom aren't opposites. That honor can come from choice as well as birth. Choice. Karthi spat the word. You are servant caste. You have no right to choose. Under human law, I do. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The council members' antennae moved in patterns of shock and outrage. If you accept citizenship, one warned, you will be cast out. No Meridian household will ever accept your service. Your batch sisters will be forbidden to contact you. You will be alone. The threat struck deep. Young's antennae drooped despite her efforts to maintain composure. The thought of never seeing her batch sisters again, of being cut off from her entire society. But then she thought of Ambassador Yunji's words. You're becoming yourself. I will not be alone, she said finally. I have colleagues now, not masters. I have friends who value me for who I am, not what I was bred to be. And maybe I can help build a bridge between our peoples. Show that change doesn't mean destruction. You would abandon everything you are for these aliens, Karthi demanded. No. Young's antennae straightened with sudden certainty. I would become more than what others decided I should be. Is that not also part of our nature? To adapt, to grow, to evolve. The council chamber filled with angry cliques and hostile pheromones. Young stood her ground, though every instinct bred into her screamed to submit, to apologize, to accept her place. You have one day to reject this citizenship offer, Karthi announced finally. If you do not, you will be marked as cast out. Choose wisely. Young walked back to the human embassy slowly, her mind churning. Around her, humans and aliens moved freely through the streets, choosing their own paths. A Meridian servant passed by, head down, antennae properly positioned. Their eyes met briefly, and Young saw something in them. A question, a longing, a possibility. In her quarters, she looked at herself in the mirror. Her exoskeleton still showed the subtle markings of the servant caste, but her posture was different now. Her antennae moved with confidence she'd never known she could possess. The citizenship notification still waited on her datavat. One touch would change everything, or perhaps simply acknowledge changes that had already happened. She thought of her batch sisters, still serving in traditional households. She thought of the other servants who had begun asking questions after seeing her example. She thought of the High Coordinator's grudging admission that change might be necessary. Most of all, she thought of who she was becoming. Not just a servant, not just a citizen, but something new, someone who could help bridge two worlds. Her hand reached for the datapad. Choice, she was learning, was both a freedom and a responsibility. And she was ready for both. The news of Young's citizenship application spread through the Meridian community like wildfire. She sat in her office at the human embassy, reading message after message on her datavat. Some were threats from traditionalists, others were hidden notes of support from fellow servants, and a surprising number were questions from members of all castes about how she had done it. Your story has gone viral on both worlds, Ambassador Yunji said, entering the office with 2 cups of tea. The Meridian news networks are calling you a traitor. The human ones are calling you a pioneer. Young's antennae twitched as she accepted the tea. I never meant to cause such confusion. I just wanted to be more than what I was told to be. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices, Yunji replied. Have you seen the latest reports from other embassies? Young opened the news feed. Across the galaxy, other Meridian servants in human households were beginning to speak up. Some were requesting contracts like hers. Others were applying for education programs. A few had even begun the citizenship process. But the backlash was growing too. The Meridian Council had issued new restrictions on servant assignments to human households. Traditional families were withdrawing their servants from alien employment. There was talk of genetic modifications to make future servant broods more compliant. They're afraid, Young said quietly, not just of change, but of questions, once we start asking why things must be as they are. She paused as another message arrived, this one from her batch sister, Kira, who served in a high-caste Meridian household. The message was brief but clear. Help me. Young's inner eyelids flickered rapidly as she read Kira's situation. Her masters had restricted all contact with the outside world, fearing she might be contaminated by He-Young's example. But Kira had secretly been studying, learning, questioning. Now she wanted out. "I need to do something," He-Young said, standing up. Not just for Kira, but for all of them. She spent the next 3 days writing, drawing on everything she had learned about both cultures. When she finished, she had created a document that was part manifesto, part legal argument, and part personal story. "I want to release this publicly," she told Yoonji. "But I need your help to make sure it reaches both human and Myridian audiences." Yoonji read the document carefully. "This will cause an uproar. The Myridian Council will be furious." They're already furious. At least now they'll have to engage with the argument, not just the anger. The document was released simultaneously on human and Myridian networks. He-Young's words, translated into multiple languages, spread rapidly. "I was bred to serve, but I learned to think. I was trained to obey, but I discovered choice. I was told my nature was fixed, but I found it could grow. To my Myridian brothers and sisters, our abilities do not limit us. They enable us. Our training can be a foundation to build upon, not walls to contain us. To my human friends, your acceptance showed me possibilities I never knew existed. Now I ask for your help in extending those possibilities to others." The response was immediate and intense. Myridian conservatives demanded her arrest for sedition. Human rights groups offered support and protection. But most importantly, servants began to move. They didn't all seek citizenship like He-Young. Some simply asked for contracts and fair treatment. Others requested education or training. Each small act of self-determination sent ripples through Myridian society. Kira managed to escape her household and seek asylum at the human embassy. When she saw He-Young, her antennae moved in a pattern of joy and fear. "I didn't know," Kira said, her translator crackling with emotion. "I didn't know we could be more." He-Young held her batch sister's hands. "Neither did I, until someone showed me. Now we show others." The Myridian Council summoned He-Young again. This time, she walked into their chamber with her head high. Her new citizenship papers filed and approved. "You have caused chaos," Karthi accused. "Servants abandoning their posts, young ones questioning their training. Even some higher castes are beginning to ask inappropriate questions." "Questions are not chaos," He-Young replied. "Change is not destruction. Look at me. I still serve, but now I serve by choice. I still use my abilities, but now I develop them fully. I still honor our traditions, but now I help them evolve. You destroy thousands of years of order. Order without growth is stagnation." He-Young's antennae moved in a pattern of her own creation, one that combined respect with challenge. "Our people reached the stars because we were willing to adapt. Why should our society be any different?" As she left the council chamber, a young servant caught her eye. The servant's antennae moved in a tiny pattern of hope before quickly resuming their proper position. That evening, He-Young received another dozen messages from servants seeking help. She answered each one, offering advice, support, and most importantly, hope. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Yoonji asked her. "This is only the beginning." He-Young looked out at the city where humans and aliens walked together under the setting sun. "I'm ready," she said. "We all are. We just didn't know it until now." Her antennae moved in a pattern of determination as she began planning the next phase of what was becoming not just her journey, but a movement. A movement born from a simple question: what could we become if we were free to choose? 1 year had passed since He-Young first questioned her place in the universe. She stood before a mirror in her quarters, adjusting her formal attire. A unique blend of human diplomatic dress and traditional Myridian markers. Today was special. Today, everything would change. The conference room at the Interstellar Diplomatic Center buzzed with activity. Representatives from both human and Myridian governments filled the space, along with journalists and observers from a dozen other species. At the center of it all sat Young, her antennae steady with purpose. The Joint Cultural Exchange Initiative, she began, her translator conveying calm confidence, represents more than just policy changes. It represents hope. The documents before them detailed a revolutionary new program. Under its terms, Meridian servants could choose to remain in traditional roles or opt for education and career training. Those who chose to advance would be protected by both human and Meridian law. Kira sat beside her, now serving as a cultural liaison herself. In the past year, over 200 servants had followed Young's path, finding new roles while maintaining their connection to Meridian society. They weren't just servants anymore. They were teachers, diplomats, artists, and engineers. A year ago, Young continued, someone asked me if my reward for years of service was too small. They meant my salary, my benefits, my citizenship. She paused, her antennae moving in a pattern of joy mixed with determination. But my true reward was discovering who we all could become when given the chance. The High Coordinator, who had fought these changes at first, now sat nodding slowly. The success of the evolved servants, as they were being called, could not be denied. Productivity was up. Cultural understanding had improved. Even the most traditional families were beginning to see the benefits of having educated, motivated staff who chose to serve. Your example has opened many eyes, the High Coordinator admitted during the signing ceremony. Though I must ask, do you ever regret leaving traditional service? Young's inner eyelids flickered thoughtfully. I haven't left service, High Coordinator. I've expanded it. Now I serve both our peoples by building bridges between them. Is that not a worthy calling? After the ceremony, Young found Ambassador Yunji waiting in the garden. They had worked closely together over the past year, turning an individual's choice into a movement for change. Do you remember your first day at the embassy? Yunji asked, smiling. You could barely look me in the eye. I remember being scandalized that you made your own breakfast. Young replied, her antennae curling in amusement. Now I'm teaching other servants how to cook human foods. They walked together through the garden, where Meridian bioluminescent flowers now grew alongside earth roses, another small symbol of change. Young paused to greet a group of newly arrived servants, their antennae twitching with nervous excitement as they began their own journeys of discovery. What's next for you? Yunji asked as they watched the newcomers explore their new home. Young's antennae moved in a pattern she had created herself, one that meant possibility. The university has asked me to help develop a cross-cultural education program, and there's talk of expanding the initiative to other species with rigid social structures. A far cry from serving tea, Yunji observed. But I still make excellent tea, Young said, her translator conveying the gentle humor. Now I choose when and for whom to serve it. That evening, Young returned to her quarters, no longer servants' chambers, but a proper diplomatic residence. On her desk sat the original contract she had signed with the human embassy, next to her citizenship papers and her new diplomatic credentials. A message chimed on her datapad. Another servant seeking guidance. This one wrote, "They say the reward for service is honor, but you found something more. What is it?" Young thought carefully before responding. Her antennae moved in complex patterns as she composed her answer. The reward isn't in what you gain, but in who you become. It's in the questions you dare to ask, the choices you dare to make, and the doors you dare to open for others. Every time I see a former servant discover their passion, whether it's diplomacy or art or science, that's my reward. Every time someone realizes they can honor their nature while growing beyond it, that's my reward. She sent the message and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, other servants were reading her words, asking their own questions, making their own choices. The movement she had started was growing, evolving, just as she had evolved. A year ago, she had wondered if her reward was too small. Now she knew. The true reward was never about money or status or even freedom itself. It was about becoming who you were meant to be, not who others said you should be. Her antennae moved in a pattern of contentment as she prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new opportunities to help others find their path. And that, she had learned, was the greatest reward of all. As she drifted off to sleep, her final thought was of that first morning in the embassy, when Ambassador Yunjae had made her own breakfast. Such a small thing, to make one's own choices. Such a large thing, to help others discover they could do the same. The reward, she knew now, was never too small. It was as vast as the universe itself, filled with all the possibilities of what could be when beings were free to choose their own path. And she had only just begun to explore it.